there, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Fantasy for the Ages, the show where father and son sit down and talk about fantasy, science fiction, and whatever other nerdiness we feel like talking about. Today, you're here with me for another Just Jim episode. Just the father here for you today, or as friends once described me not too long ago, Daddy. Okay, that's an inside joke, but we may have some fun with that in the episodes coming up. Zach and I just got back from JordanCon. Amazing experience in Atlanta, Georgia, with a whole bunch of fans of obviously The Wheel of Time, Robert Jordan, and finished by Brandon Sanderson's epic fantasy series. And it also features all other sorts of fantasy and science fiction that people may be interested in, especially things like Mistborn or the Stormlight Archive and other things of the Cosmere by Brandon Sanderson. Being around people who love these big, long, epic series kind of inspired me to come back and do an episode on epic fantasy and ways to take on such series if you've been apprehensive about it. Maybe you've been more the kind of person that just likes to read standalone novels, or nothing more than a trilogy, and something of grand epic scale has felt too much for you. This episode will try to shift your opinion, give you some tips that could help you out in moving into something a little more robust. But before I do that, let me talk about just a couple other details. Of course, what am I drinking today? We always are drinking something when we record these. At JordanCon, a little bit of drinking goes on. So I don't really have a need to get into something really robust in the alcohol version. I've just got some wine today. This is a nice red table wine, Farmhands Red from Pomeroy Cellars. I've talked about them before. A little small boutique vineyard about 20 minutes north of my house. Nice blend, good nose. I will enjoy that wine, and I will try to remember to take a sip from time to time, but Just Jim episodes, it's only me talking. I do sometimes forget to remember to sip. We'll see how I do today. The other couple things to mention, again, JordanCon, so much fun. If you are a fan of The Wheel of Time, or if you become one, this is definitely an event worth trying to get to. Fairly inexpensive as a con. If you've done anything like Dragon Con or Comic Con, these things can get pretty robust and expensive and have large crowds. That's not JordanCon. Pretty inexpensive cost just to attend. Your biggest cost might just be getting there, to be honest, depending where you're traveling from. We do have people who attend from all over the world. And the actual con itself is just in one hotel with a pretty manageable number of people. In fact, you get to know the crowd pretty well, and you'll make new friends if you attend. Zach and I have now attended twice. Definitely already planning to be there next year again. So maybe we'll see you there. Kind of flowing from JordanCon, we also did make new friends. So we've noticed we picked up some new YouTube followers. Welcome to the channel. Maybe this is the first new one that you're seeing. And we've got more Twitter followers jumping in here now as we're climbing up through the 900s. Again, thanks for joining us. Glad to have you along, entertained by the things we're posting about, or maybe thought-provoking once in a while, especially as I review books. And a couple new members on our Discord server. Always love having more people who like to talk about fantasy and science fiction books with us in Discord. You can find how to find us on Twitter and on Discord and other social media avenues down here in the show notes. Take a look, and we'd love to get to know you and connect. Now, let's talk about these epic fantasy series. We're talking about things like, of course, The Wheel of Time, but also The Dragon Riders of Pern, A Song of Ice and Fire. I guess I should mention authors, Pern, that's Anne McCaffrey. A Song of Ice and Fire, that's George R.R. Martin. The Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. Malazan, Book of the Fallen, Stephen Erickson, and many, many more. I'm discussing how to approach these types of series, and I'm not going to focus too much on the definition of epic fantasy. Just how do we come to these kind of books and enjoy them? All you really need to know about my consideration of epic fantasy here today is that these are books that are epic in length. Okay, so this isn't just 2 or 3 books. These are series, some that may be 20, 30 books in length. Not all of them are that long. I mean, Stormlight Archive only has 4 books right now, but each one, well, it'll break your toe if you drop it. So these are epic works of literature. They also tend to be epic in the impact the story is making on its world. They're epic in the impact on characters, the kinds of things that will happen to the characters, the significance of the events they go through. And so that leads us to the last thing, an epicness to the story itself, its depth, the implications of the things that happen in the story along the way. Just epic, epic, epic. That's about all I need to say. You get the point. These are epic pieces of literature. So, tips. I'm going to give you just a hodgepodge of things to think about that I hope will make approaching epic fantasy feel a little more palatable to you. The first tip I want to give you today is don't worry about the length. I mean, that's one of the things I hear in concerns. It's such a commitment. How could I read something that's 15 books long, 30 books long? I mean, it's just too much. Now, come on. If a story is great, don't you want to get as much of it as you can? Why worry about the length? You just want it to keep going and going and going. So I think that's a false concern some people have. They're not really thinking that through. Think about a great TV series you've really enjoyed. Weren't you ticked when it was canceled? If you were still enjoying the series, you wanted another season. Epic fantasy books are the same way. If you've gotten into it, you're just going to keep digging it. Also, if you're someone who's like thinking, yeah, but I'll get bored reading too much of the same series, take breaks. It is perfectly acceptable to take a break between books. You aren't forced to read the series from beginning to end, excluding all else until you're done. No. Some of us like to do that sometimes, but there is no requirement to do that. My wife, she read the whole Wheel of Time last year, and she kept sticking in her little mystery romance books in between. I mean, Nora Roberts kept inserting herself in between these tomes of the Wheel of Time, and that made it easier for her to stick with it. And she did get it done, and she thoroughly enjoyed the series, but didn't have to give up on other books she liked too. So there's a tip. All right, here's the second one. Don't think to be successful with epic fantasy that you have to understand everything you're reading the first time you read it. Good epic fantasy gives you a quality story on your first read, but it will give you an even deeper, more profound, better story on a reread. But again, just because rereading will make it better doesn't require you to reread it. The initial story will be good enough just to enjoy it the first time through. With many of the epic fantasy tales I have read, I've wanted to read them again, and I've got a richer experience, but I haven't done that with all of them. Goodness knows. Terry Brooks, the Shannara cycle, it goes well over 30 books. Once. There's like 3 or 4 of them I read a second time, but the vast majority, once was enough. I've got too much else to read to go through 30-some books again. Now, some people do find when they're going through epic fantasy, especially if they're not very familiar with it, or if the series they're reading is a little complex, that they do struggle to understand well enough what's going on. They're not making enough connections, so the story's too confusing, and they get frustrated, and maybe they feel like just quitting because of that. Well, another pro tip for you here is many of the best epic fantasy series out there have people doing podcasts and YouTube channels just dedicated to those books. The Cosmere is like that. A Song of Ice and Fire is certainly like that. Right now, as I'm reading through Malazan Book of the Fallen, there are podcasts just covering these books, chapter by chapter, book by book. So you don't have to do this alone. Zach and I, even, of course, are breaking down the Wheel of Time chapter by chapter, a great companion for someone who's a first time reader. So if you want help, find a good YouTube show or podcast to listen to as you work through the chapters and help you make those connections you are missing. Just be careful. Don't get one that's heavy on the spoilers because that can ding your experience. Another great thing, in addition to podcasts and YouTube, is to find a Discord channel where people discuss these types of fantasy books without spoilers. Find a safe place to have conversations with other readers working their way through for the first time. You will find a lot of people on many of these fantasy Discord servers, including ours, who just love to talk about books. And if you're a first time reader and they've already read it, they were more than happy to hear your thoughts, your questions, and kind of point you in the right direction, give you some tips without ruining the delight of the story for you. So, Discord, another great companion to reading through epic fantasy. Drink sip time. Gotta remember this. Okay. Another challenge with epic fantasy is sometimes the names. Names of people, names of places, names of events. They're just made up words. They're so hard to grasp sometime. And I mean, can we talk about the apostrophes? Some of these authors are like apostrophe here, apostrophe there. Makes the word seem more fantasy-like. Gets a little goofy sometimes. How do you say these words? No one cares. Truly, no one really cares. Usually the authors don't care how you pronounce these things. They're just fun words. Okay, there are some people who do care that you pronounce things right. And if you've listened to our back podcast and YouTube episodes, Zach and I've had fun going off on each other. Tarvalon, 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 and a few other examples. But it doesn't really matter if someone hardcore is like, no, you're doing it wrong. It's not your problem. It's their problem. Make these books your own. Have your own head canon for how to say these places. And that is just fine. Enjoy it the way it is. Again, 99 out of 100 authors are like, yeah, do it your way. I just want you to enjoy the story. All right. Another thing about epic fantasy, many authors have enjoyed creating maps that go along with their stories. Things to lay out these worlds they've created. Maps can be your friend. But they're not necessary. You're perfectly free to say, screw the maps. I will usually look at the maps before I read a story and kind of just get a feel for it. But honestly, I don't have any context. So doesn't make a lot of sense. Later in the story, I remember the map is there. So if I want to go back and kind of get a grip on the geography, where they're moving from, I can refer back to the map. But my wife hates the maps. Doesn't stop her from reading. You can skip the maps. They're not essential. They're just value added. So if they add no value for you, fine. Don't worry about the maps. Another pro tip for you. These epic fantasy series are indeed long, quite often. They can be quite a commitment to get through them. You owe no one as you try to work through a series. So if you're not getting into it, it's perfectly fine not to finish. We haven't even have jargon for it. DNF. You DNF'd it. Did not finish. That's fine. It happens all the time for people. Some people like me have a little bit of a struggle. I'm a completionist. I really want to finish something once I've started. But even I have on rare occasion DNF'd something. Life is too short. If you're not liking it, stop. You are never trapped into this commitment now and you must finish. I'll give you one caveat though. If you tried something and you didn't care for it, set it aside. But you don't necessarily want to give up on it completely. Just because you didn't like it now doesn't mean you might not like it 5 years from now or 10 years down the road. So it's okay to come back to something another time. Now, why would you possibly like it if you already DNF'd it in the past? You change. We all do. We have different life experiences. We, at different points in our lives, our context changes. How we look at the world changes. What we like and dislike changes. I mean, that happens in lots of things. I used to hate tomatoes. Now I love tomatoes. I used to hate Bloody Marys. I'm still struggling with those. But I have had a few spicy Bloody Marys this year that I appreciated. I'm still not sure I can say I liked them, but I'm still trying because I should. I feel like I should like a Bloody Mary. I'm getting there. So things do change. I've certainly known people who tried a series when they weren't ready for it, but tried it again years later and it was fantastic. So there you go. Sip time. Wine's still good. Yeah. All right. Here's another one. If you have not read epic fantasy before and you want to give this a try, especially if I'm convincing you to give this a try, let me give you a suggestion. Start with something a little less robust and hardcore than some of the series that are out there. A suggestion might be Dragonlance. Now, the Dragonlance series, there's well over 100 books written in Dragonlance, but they come in little chunks, little trilogies often, or quadrilogies, and you can just tie some of those together and get some epic tales that you might enjoy. I'd recommend the first 6 Dragonlance books as a great way to dip your feet, your toes, into the world of epic fantasy. Mistborn is another example. There's 3 Mistborn books in Era 1, and then 4 more books in Era 2. Eventually, Sanderson's going to write Era 3 and Era 4, but they're not out yet at the time of this recording. So there's 7 Mistborn books just waiting for you. That's a nice start. They're fairly approachable. Dragon Riders of Pern is another one that I can recommend. It's fairly easy to get into. My wife is now working through it, reading book 6 now. There are 26 books at this point in the Dragon Riders of Pern. But really, you could read as far as book 12 or 13. I think it's book 12. You could move through and get the core story. And you could stop there. But you can keep going if you're really enjoying it. And there's more to tell, more stories to come. Those are stories that are just, they are epic fantasy in their own ways, but they're not as challenging on the reader who doesn't have a lot of experience with epic fantasy. I'd even say The Wheel of Time is one you could do. Now, again, this is 15 books long, and 14 of those 15 books are quite lengthy. But the story itself is not really gonna burden you, make it super hard to figure out what's going on. It's written in a way that's very approachable. It certainly fits the bill of one where it is better the second time and the third time. There's depths and nuances you'll miss the first time through. But the first time through, it's still a great story. But then something like Well, what I'm reading now, Malazan Book of the Fallen, I'm loving it. My first time through, I'm almost done with book 2. There's 10 books in the core series. There's more books that have been added on to expand further on the world, but it's these first 10 that I'm plowing through. This is some deep stuff. There's some profound epicness to this series. But if I had not read lots of other fantasy, I might not be enjoying myself. I'm totally enjoying myself for where I am as a fantasy reader at this point. So I would never recommend Malazan right off the bat. Stormlight Archive, same thing. This is what Brandon Sanderson worked his way up to writing. And now these are massive books and so many things going on in them and so deep, so many hidden layers. Yet work your way up to Stormlight Archive. Don't start there. Now, you don't know what all these books are about. So if you try a series for your first epic fantasy and you're like, this is so hard, I'm so lost, you might have just picked the wrong one. So don't judge all epic fantasy by the first thing you try to read. Guess that's my tip. All right, a few more tips. I want to affirm you that what you like and what you dislike is valid. If you try a series and you aren't digging it does not matter how many other people love that series. They aren't you. They don't have your life experiences. They don't have your preferences. So the rest of the world can rave about a series. But if you don't like it, then as far as you're concerned, the rest of the world's wrong. And that's okay. An example, Robin Hobb. Robin Hobb is an epic fantasy author. The Farseer series. She's written a bunch of trilogies and such that all kind of tie together. And I've only read one of those trilogies, and I just didn't like it. Nope. Wasn't my thing. I more or less didn't like Robin Hobb's writing style. I got bored. There are tons of people that love Robin Hobb, but there are also some people out there that, like me, just don't care for her writing. They're all wrong, in my opinion. I'm with the people who don't like it. Now, again, I'm not trying to say Robin Hobb is a bad author, and people who enjoy her stuff, good on them. But it's not my thing. Perfectly valid. Now, let me give you an exception to the rule. Terry Goodkind. The Sword of Truth series. I think there might actually be another name for the series, but the first book is The Sword of Truth. And I have read the entire series. I enjoyed it. The earlier books. Later in the series, it gets really uber dark and kind of boring, kind of pointless. But early stuff I kind of liked. Now, I read this, and this is true epic fantasy. I read it years ago. Later, I come to discover Terry Goodkind was not a good kind of person. You can look this up online if you want, but he was very disparaging about other authors, about fantasy fans. He tried to claim he didn't even consider his books as fantasy. They were more philosophical treatises on humanity. What kind of bunk was this guy into? So I can't recommend his books anymore because the dude was not cool. And I don't want any more money. He's passed away now, but I don't want money going to his estate, going to these books. So skip Terry Goodkind's books. Okay? That's the epic fantasy I don't recommend you try. I could go on more, but others already have. If you really want to know more, Google it. And save that thought. I'm going to come back to Google in just a couple moments, but here's a couple other things before I talk about Google. Here's a tip. This is important. Publication date of books matter. Not all epic fantasy ages well. This is truth. There are things written in the 60s, 70s, 80s that were incredible, or I could still say are incredible works of epic fantasy, but a modern reader will find that the way they were written, well, they're now highly culturally inappropriate. Things we consider quite insensitive today are scattered throughout the books, and people just weren't thinking the way they do today back then. So, if that's something that's going to make you uncomfortable, the way women are portrayed, if the lack of representation is a big issue, uh, if these things that are glaringly out of step with today's culture and society are going to take you out of the story, stick to things written more recently. You might want to stay with things that are written in the 1990s and later, or maybe that's too far back, and even you want to stick to the 2000s and on, or maybe you need to wait for 2010 and progress from there. Kind of gauge that and what your comfort level is. I can read things from a long time ago that are horribly inappropriate now, but look past it because, okay, back at that time, we were different as people. We didn't all think that same way about certain social issues. And I can just look at the story anyways. Not everybody can do that. Not everybody wants to do that. So keep publication date in mind. When we talk about more recent fantasy, we need to also acknowledge grimdark. There are some books clearly written in the grimdark subgenre that also become epic fantasy. I'd say A Song of Ice and Fire by George R. Martin and the First Law series by Joe Abercrombie are examples here. Definitely grimdark tales, but also epic in their scope as fantasy series. These books can be kind of harsh. Things like the Wheel of Time or the Rift War saga are also epic fantasy tales, but they don't get nearly as dark and gruesome for the most part as Grimdark leans into. So you have to again judge your preference and what you're comfortable with. You may not want to go into the ones that are grimdark if excessive violence, over sexualization, and every good person getting a sucky end is troubling for you. Stick to the things that are a little lighter and more cheerful. I'm not going to say something like Wheel of Time or the Rift War saga doesn't have bad things happening or difficult issues and gruesome events. They do, but that's the exception, not the prevailing theme of the books. When it prevails, you're in the grim dark subgenre, so just be aware that's out there and that's part of epic fantasy, which you may or may not like. Okay, I come to my final tip here as we wrap up this, relatively short episode for Fantasy for the Ages. And that is Google. Google can be your friend. Google can also be your enemy, your saboteur. So, when you're reading an epic fantasy series, I strongly recommend you don't have conversations with Google about the series. Because it doesn't matter what you're looking up on Google, spoilers abound. If you don't care about spoilers, then you don't have to care about this recommendation. But most people don't want the big surprise in book 13 to be thrust upon them when they were just looking up what something meant from book 1. Google can't read your mind, it doesn't understand. So, again, to better understand the things you're looking at, find podcasts and YouTube channels that break down these series, or find a Discord server like ours where you can come on and talk, ask questions in a safe environment, and we will protect you from the spoilers. Google doesn't care. Google thinks you want to know everything now. And if you're like Zach and you don't care about spoilers, use Google, but I think you're out of your mind. Don't do it. All right, there you go. Some tips for tackling epic fantasy. I hope you will make good use of these. And if you're already an epic fantasy fan, and I missed something that you think would be a great tip, here's your opportunity to drop those down in the show notes and share it out with the world as well. Or you could hit us up on Twitter or any of those other social medias or even our email and say, Jim, how did you not say blah, blah, blah? And I'll be happy to hear it from you. I would also at this time remind you that below the YouTube episode is that handy dandy little thumbs up to show you liked this episode. It really helps us out when we get likes. So if you did like this, literally click that like button now. And if you're not a subscriber, oh man, we have so many things that you could be enjoying on our channel. So this is also your opportunity to subscribe. We hope you'll stick around. Check out all our long form content, all our little episodes, mini tiny talks and rapid reviews. More and more of these will be coming out in the months ahead. So do it. Do it. Daddy says so. Do it. Okay. Enough of that nonsense. Let me run our credit pictures here going on the side. Just a visual reminder of the same things I've already told you. Like and subscribe. Find us on Discord. The invitation link is there in the notes. I didn't mention the Patreon page. You can really get into what we're doing here. Join us on Patreon. Support us for as little as $1 a month. You get some extra benefits as part of the Fantasy Ages family. There's the rest of the stuff. All the socials. Look forward to seeing you around. And thanks for watching. We'll talk to you next time.